As I sit by the window of my small apartment, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the room, I feel a familiar chill creep up my spine. It's strange how memories, no matter how deeply buried, rise to the surface when you least expect them. I close my eyes, and I'm no longer here, in the crowded city. Instead, I'm back at Aunt Martha's farm, in that vast and lonely stretch of countryside. I'm 10 years old again, and the sounds of the old wooden house creaking, the wind rustling through the trees, and the whispered warnings fill my ears. My parents had sent me to Aunt Martha's farm for the summer. They said I needed fresh air, some time away from the city. The farm was isolated, tucked deep in the woods miles from the nearest town, where the close neighbors were acres away. It was a peaceful place in the daylight, with sprawling fields and the comfort routine of farm life. But when the sun began to set and the woods closed in around the house, the charm seemed to vanish. The tall trees pressed against the house like sentinels, the shadows stretching long and dark across the fields. Aunt Martha had been firm with me from the beginning. "Don't go into the woods alone," she had said the first night as she tucked me into bed, "and never open the door after sundown, no matter what." I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know. I spent my days feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, and watching the cows graze in the fields. But the woods, thick and dark, always stood at the edge of the farm like a looming presence. I avoided them, just like she told me, though sometimes I thought I heard strange noises from their depths. Crunching leaves, a distant snapping twig, as if someone or something was moving in there. One evening, as the sun began to sink behind the horizon, Aunt Martha was in a hurry to finish the evening chores. She came into the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "I need to lock up the goat shed before dark," she said, her voice calm but brisk. "Make sure the front door is locked tight while I'm out. Don't answer the door for anyone." I nodded, but something in her voice made my skin prickle. The unease was subtle, like she was reminding herself as much as she was reminding me. She grabbed her keys from the counter and walked toward the side door. I watched her silhouette disappear through the hall as she headed toward the shed, but as I turned away, I wasn't sure if she had left or gone to the back of the house where I couldn't see. I locked the door as she had asked and made my way into the living room, where the last light of the day bathed the room in a soft, fading glow. I sat by the window, watching the darkness slowly creep over the landscape, swallowing the fields, the trees, and the barn in its path. The woods, once a distant barrier, now seemed closer, pressing against the farmhouse like a predator circling its prey. That's when I heard it. A soft knock at the front door. I froze, my heart pounding. It was a gentle knock, barely audible over the growing chorus of crickets outside. I stared at the door, my mind racing. Aunt Martha had told me not to answer the door after sundown, no matter what. But hadn't she gone to the goat shed? Maybe she had forgotten her key. Before I could decide what to do, I heard her voice. "Annabelle," she called softly. "Sweetheart, open the door." My breath caught in my throat. It was her voice, unmistakably. But something felt wrong. I had heard her go outside, hadn't I? She wouldn't be back so quickly, and why would she knock if she had the key? I inched closer, my hand now hovering over the knob. The knock came again, soft but insistent. I looked at the frosted glass and could make out a tall, shadowy figure. But something wasn't right. The outline was blurry, almost too thin, and was it moving? My stomach lurched. It seemed to shift, the silhouette elongating, then shrinking again. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the glass obscured any real detail. Still, my instincts screamed at me to stay away. Then, upstairs, I heard it. A soft, melodic humming. It was so faint, like a distant lullaby carried on the wind, but unmistakable. Aunt Martha often hummed when she was doing chores. She always said it kept her company. I recognized the tune instantly, and my blood ran cold. It was coming from upstairs. Aunt Martha couldn't be upstairs and outside at the same time. The humming continued, steady and calm, as if nothing strange were happening. But my mind was now a whirlwind of confusion and terror. What was I hearing? Was Aunt Martha upstairs? Had she ever gone outside? My memory of her leaving was now a jumbled mess, distorted by the growing fear gnawing at my insides. Outside, the knocking grew louder. "Annabelle, open the door." The voice was harsher now, almost snapping, but it still held that unnerving familiarity. It wasn't just the sound of my aunt's voice. It was the way it mimicked her mannerisms, the little nuances in her tone that made it feel too real. But Aunt Martha's upstairs. She had to be. I heard her humming. I swallowed the rising lump of fear in my throat and made my decision. Slowly, I backed away from the door, my heart thudding in my chest so loudly I was sure whoever, or whatever, was outside could hear it. The voice outside grew angrier, more forceful, but I ignored it. I needed to know for sure. I crept toward the stairs, each step sending a creak through the old farmhouse. The voice at the door wasn't pleading anymore. It was snarling. "Annabelle, let me in, now." My breath hitched, but I kept climbing, one shaky foot after the other, up the stairs and toward the soft humming. The sound grew clearer the closer I got, soothing in its regularity, as if nothing at all was wrong. But everything was wrong. I reached the top of the stairs, my legs trembling beneath me. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by the last rays of sunlight filtering through the window. The guest room door was slightly ajar, the humming now unmistakably coming from inside. I stepped forward, my heart in my throat, and nudged the door open. There she was, Aunt Martha, standing by the bed, calmly folding a stack of freshly laundered clothes. She was humming the same soft tune I'd heard from downstairs, her back turned to me. For a moment, relief flooded my body. It really was her. She hadn't gone outside. She was here, safe, inside the house. But then, an icy realization clawed its way into my mind. Who, or what, was at the door? "Aunt Martha," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. She stopped humming, her hands stilled on the clothes. Slowly, almost too slowly, she turned to face me. Her expression was calm, but her eyes, there was something in her eyes, something dark, knowing. She didn't ask me what was wrong. She didn't need to. She already knew. She crossed the room toward me, her movements deliberate but slow, like she was trying not to spook me. Her hand rested on my shoulder, and though her touch was gentle, a ripple of cold spread through my skin. Downstairs, the pounding at the door intensified. It was no longer knocking, but hammering, as though whatever was outside was trying to break the door down. And the voice. It was no longer just mimicking Aunt Martha. It had become something else, something twisted. The tone was too sharp, too loud, and the words were garbled, like the creature had forgotten how to form human sounds properly. I flinched, but Aunt Martha's grip on my shoulder tightened, steadying me. Her face was calm, though the tension in her jaw betrayed her fear. We moved together, slowly, back to the bed. I climbed onto the mattress, and she sat beside me, wrapping her arm around my trembling body. The thing outside didn't stop. The hammering grew more violent, rattling the windows, shaking the doorframe. The voice screeched my name over and over again, warping with every call, sometimes high-pitched and desperate, other times guttural and filled with rage. I buried my face in Aunt Martha's side, my body shaking with silent sobs. She held me close, her arms a fragile barrier between us and the horror outside. The creature at the door grew more frenzied, more violent. It wasn't just trying to get in. It was trying to tear its way inside. The house itself seemed to groan under the pressure. The windows rattled in their frames, the floorboards creaked and shifted, and the door, God, the door, sounded like it might give way at any moment. But Aunt Martha didn't move. She didn't speak. She just held me, her body stiff and still, her eyes fixed on the door to the room, as though expecting something else to come through. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The hammering ceased, and the house fell into an oppressive, suffocating silence. The voice outside went quiet, leaving behind only the sound of my ragged breathing and the distant chirping of crickets. I didn't dare move. I didn't even lift my head from Aunt Martha's side. The silence was almost worse than the noise had been, thick and unnatural, as though the air itself had turned solid. Aunt Martha shifted slightly, loosening her grip on me, but she didn't speak. We sat there for what felt like hours, listening, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, the first light of dawn crept through the windows. Aunt Martha stood slowly, her face pale and drawn, and moved toward the bedroom door. I followed her, my legs shaky, my body drained of any strength. We moved together down the stairs, every creak of the floorboards sounding too loud in the quiet house. The front door was still locked, just as we had left it. But the frosted glass was smeared with faint smudges, long and thin like the marks of something pressing against it from the outside. We stood there, staring at the door, neither of us saying a word. Aunt Martha reached out, her hand hovering over the knob for a moment before she finally pulled it away. Without a word, she turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I followed, but the image of those smudges stayed with me. They were too long, too thin, like fingers, but not fingers. Whatever had been outside last night, it wasn't human. It had never been human. Aunt Martha never spoke of that night again, and neither did I. But from that moment on, I never went outside after dark, and I never, ever answered the door when the sun went down. Now, years later, as I sit here in my apartment watching the shadows grow long, I can still hear that voice, still feel the cold press of fear against my skin. The memory is as vivid as it was that night, a nightmare that refuses to fade. Some memories linger. Some things are better left outside.